We're going to do something we thought we'd never do. We're going to do something we thought we'd never do. Let's talk about Yrel. Yrel, hands down, probably the most underrated character in the entire game. Like, there's a lot of heroes that are, I feel, underrated. This is probably one of the ones, and she just got a slight nerf not long ago. So we're going to talk about Yrel. We're going to go over some ways to play Yrel. This will be pretty in-depth because Yrel actually has very healthy talents. I'll talk about the usual talents, but more importantly, how to determine what talents to pick and when. I didn't really play a lot of Yrel in the past. I always knew she was good. I just, offlaner was never for me. But for Yrel, we're going to talk about this. Now, before we get into the talents, there's a couple of very generic things I want to talk about, but also one of the more complex sides. When it comes to Yrel, when you see the Yrels, they come in. A very generic way of getting onto people is by holding your E, preparing your fight, and then jumping onto somebody behind them, and then DW behind. If you're wondering, like, what's a very generic combo to get started with, you want to pretty much jump on somebody, E behind them, hit DW, knock them back into your team. That's a very generic way, and normally the way that most people are getting punished at lower levels. At higher levels, a lot of people will see when Yrel's wings are lighting up, they're normally trying to interrupt her. They're normally trying to knock her back when she's coming in. If you're a Rainer, you should be looking at that the same way that you would look at a Diablo Shadow Charge. Interrupting that can disrupt a lot of what Yrel wants to do. There's a lot that goes into Yrel. Now, because of that, the one thing I want to focus on is your divine purpose. You activate this to make your next ability at no mana cost. So this is a free one, and it instantly charges it up. So this charges it all the way up, which means your Q can be used, your W can be used, your E can be used. And using this early to DE into a fight might not be good, because then you have to charge up your W, and that might be more difficult. At the same time, you might actually go the W talent at level 7 and change the entire dynamic of the way you play. Because of that, this is very similar to Ikel'Thas, right? To where your trait will change the way your abilities function. With that being said, the only way to really grasp how to play Yrel is to really actually play Yrel. You're going to find yourself in situations to where you don't want to DW after. You might want to DQ when you go in. If I'm wave clearing, a lot in the way that I'm wave clearing, because Yrel is very slow auto attacks, I'm going to E onto the minions. Remember, this does damage to heroes more when it's charged up. You want to do, it doesn't matter how much you charge this up when you're landing on minions. You can do this in point blank range. Yrel has slow auto attack, so always make sure you E auto attack and then DQ auto attack. Normally, that's how you're going to see Yrels do wave clear early in the game. They're not going to worry too much about the knockback. Situations where you might see the knockback will depend on your matchup. Am I playing against a Leoric that's going to press W on me? I knock him away, I walk away the other direction. Am I playing against somebody? So understanding when to use your abilities is probably the hardest part, and one of the reasons a lot of people stay away from Yrel is because not every situation is the same, and you have to adapt. You can get away with the very generic stuff of E, auto, DQ, auto on a wave, and it's very good wave clear. You can very generically E onto the ranged minions and DW them back into your team for a combo, but there's going to be times where you can knock somebody into a mosh pit. You can knock them out of something. You can knock them into something. There's so many different ways to utilize Yrel that she's literally capable of doing what feels like everything. And so I really wanted to go into that before we get into the talents, because I feel like that's the biggest part, is the play style of Yrel more than the talents, although the talents can really drastically change the way that you play. And we'll talk about those now. First off, the default one that pretty much always works, Dauntless. Casting a basic ability grants Yrel 40 physical armor for 2.5 seconds. This was just nerfed, and it's still busted. This thing is absolutely busted. If there's a Greymane, a Rainer, literally one auto attacker on the other team, and I have an offlaner as well, 40 physical armor means that I am super tanky and almost unkillable. I have ways to reduce your damage. I have ways to stun you. I have ways to heal myself. There's so many different things that I can do as Yrel. When I don't have to take damage, that makes life a lot easier. Because of that, this is the de facto, very generic, basic pick. Now, back in the day, it was Murad's insight, and going back to the original thought process, that if you do go something like this, although I don't think this is ever really a go-to, but it can be, I'm going to use this in a situation where it's going to, I'm going to use an ability auto, It's a lot of healing. 40 physical armor will normally reduce more damage than what you're going to heal because of the way it functions with 2.5 seconds, right? So Dauntless is really good for that reason. The other talents are both good in their own right, but Maraud's Insight hasn't really been the meta pick for a long time. Light of Karabor increases Vindication's radius by 15%. Hitting an enemy hero increases Vindication's healing by 45%. If more than one is hit, this bonus is increased to 90%. I ran into a situation a couple of days ago where there was like a Mephisto and some other weird mage on the other team, and it didn't really make sense to have physical armor, right? Like if there's one damage dealer, if it's a gray main, something like that, I'm probably more than okay with physical armor. Maybe there's a Sonya there, I'm going to be taking a lot of damage. But if I'm going against, say, a Malthael and some other mage, and the main auto attack threat isn't that much, I might consider Light of Karabor. So a lot of this can go into that. And remember the whole concept of, look, your job as Yrel is pretty much dive in and create a lot of disruption. So because of that, you want to be extra tanky. And normally your Q is not normally the thing that you're going to use as often as your E and your W abilities. Your Q normally comes last when it comes to priority. My E to get on top of people, my W to create disruption, and my Q will generally come after or somewhere in between depending on the talents, which we'll get into here in a second. So Dauntless, for that reason, is normally considered the de facto because every ability affects this talent, and it makes it that much easier to use. The same could be said for Maraud's Insight, and this isn't a bad talent. It's just been nerfed a lot to where it's not the meta talent it used to be, and physical armor is really good. So all of Yrel's talents are generally pretty good. Dauntless being the number one. Light of Karabor is very situational, but again, if there's one or two auto attackers, meaning the offlaner, and some standard auto attacker in the back lane, Dauntless is going to be really good, but you have to adjust accordingly. Deathball composition, maybe I go into Q. Maybe I DQ more instead of DW because they're deathballing onto me. Normally, if they're deathball composition, I'm probably taking auto attacks, and Dauntless is still pretty good. Level 4. Now, I want to start by saying that all of these are situationally good or situationally bad, depending on your playstyle. Aegis of Light. If I'm playing with an Anubarak, the biggest problem with Anubarak is he's pretty squishy and he only has spell armor. Using a dive buddy along with Yrel can make a deathball composition almost unkillable. Having 25 armor for 4 seconds with a Yrel jumping on my team, let's say a Anubarak goes in, I have a gray man that dives into Worgen for him because he's a little bit too hyphy, and 10 armor is not enough for him, so we're going to give him 25 armor for 4 seconds. So I can complement my team as a result. Now, normally if I'm going this and I do have a dive composition, I'm probably thinking about my level 7 as well, which is another E talent, which gives me cooldown reduction. Now, back in the day, there were some cheesy strats used around this in competitive play where they would use a Sergeant Hammer. They would rotate the E armor, they would rotate Morales armor, and they would just trade off back and forth. So Morales had permanent armor, or Sergeant Hammer had permanent armor. There's been weird uses of this in the past. This has taken a step back because this does require me to hit my allies, and that's normally comes through communication. So there's a lot of things that go into this. Hand of Freedom is pretty much going to always be useful in a lot of games because of the nature of the games. Grant an allied hero 35% movement speed for 3 seconds and remove all slows and roots from them. That's pretty good if I have a bit of a soft cleanse for my teammates, or give them movement speed to get away from a Garrosh running at them or find some way to save them. So there's a lot of utility in this level 4 talent. Same can be said for Gift of the Naru. Divine Purpose heals the lowest health nearby allied hero other than Yrel for, well, what seems to be a decent amount. But normally Yrel's not around people to find the value in this, right? So there's not a lot that you're going to find where it's like, all right, maybe I can heal somebody near me. Deathball composition, boom, let's go. This is now going to work. Big diving composition with an Anubarak, with a Blaze, something around those nature of diving tanks. If they don't already have armor of their own, which Blaze technically does to his trait, Diablo does with the new meta build with Shadow Charge into armor, but that kind of depends on the map. So there's a lot of value that goes into the utility of these talents that can really help out. Healing, armor. Normally armor is going to win out over healing in most situations. But Hand of Freedom right now is kind of the de facto pick because there's always slows, there's always roots. You can use this. You can give 35% movement speed. I'm playing with a Garrosh. That Garrosh that runs at people, he can't quite get them because they're moving at the same speed. Guess what? Here's 35% movement speed. It's like a Zarya speed bubble at level 4. Boom, go in. Let's dominate. Let's find somebody and kill them. There's a lot of utility here. This is a very utility-oriented level 4 tier, and so all of those are situational. Level 7. Now, all of these are good, and I want to talk about how each of these can be good, and I don't want to go too much in depth because there's a lot that goes on here. Holy Avenger is generally the #1 pick because you can get value out of this, and it's always good. Hitting an enemy hero with Avenging Wrath at maximum charge deals 25% more damage, and it reduces its cooldown to 1 second, which means you can jump on somebody, charge up and jump on them again, or jump on them, DE onto them, and then continue to just stomp them. Why is that good? Because it normally pairs with Velen's Chosen at level 13. Hitting an enemy hero with a basic ability at maximum charge grants 10% spell power for 10 seconds, which means that you can straight up Goomba stomp on somebody where you charge up your E, you jump on them, you get it down to 1 second, you could E on them again. Even if you miss, you can go, but you're getting spell armor that stacks every time that you hit. Hitting an ability is really easy to do, and now all of a sudden Yrel does a ton of damage. Now, as far as the other talents go, they're actually good and can be very, very good if you know how to use them and know when to use them. Divine Steed. If I'm very macro oriented, if I'm double soaking, if I'm on a bigger map and I can macro, this is more for the higher end players, I think, that know when and where to be and how to be there, because this doesn't really do anything for you in a fight other than it can get you out of a fight, but it can get you to a fight faster, or it can get you into more of a macro oriented sense to where you can double soak on maybe Towers of Doom and then go on down and turn a 4v4 into a 5v4 because you were there first. So you have to know when to pick that. Because of that, I don't really recommend this to a lot of people that are learning Yrel because they just need to learn to press the buttons. And then later you can experiment with this. Again, a lot of Yrel is through experimentation. This was buffed a long time ago. Righteous Momentum. Gain 5% movement speed. Already cool, you know, allows me to do some stuff. But Yrel is no longer slowed while channeling Righteous Hammer. Instead, this bonus is quadrupled, meaning that I can jump onto somebody. And now when I mentioned some talents can drastically change my playstyle, this is exactly what I had in mind. I don't necessarily always have to E onto somebody. I can now waltz in there with a charged up W as a very fast goat lady swinging a big hammer. I can be interrupted, and that totally shuts down my ability, as it does with all abilities, which is what makes Yrel somewhat frustrating for people. But this does allow me to set up a lot of things potentially to get into position, to be able to knock people back where I want them to knock back, and it pairs incredibly well with the level 16, which can be picked regardless. Again, there's a lot of foresight with Yrel in terms of play style. How do I want to play against this team? I need to determine my talents ahead of time so that I have synergy in them. So all of these talents can be good. Holy Avenger if you're just starting out, because it's really easy to figure out how to get this. You just land onto people, no big deal. Righteous Momentum can be really good when there's an anti-mobile team and you can just walk up to them. They don't have a lot of interrupts. You just run up at them really fast with 20% movement speed, wielding a giant hammer, and then you get behind them and swing. They're stunned and they're knocked back really far. It's quite comical at times. So there's a lot of value in Righteous Momentum because of that movement speed, but it really determines the way you're going to play, and it can be determined by the people on the other side on whether they can just interrupt you or they can walk away due to mobility. As far as level 10 goes, Ardent Defender and Sacred Ground, they both have their place. Ardent Defender is super easy to use, and you can do a lot with this. Ardent Defender allows you to absorb big ults. If you're playing against a Kel'Thas at lower levels, Pyroblast might be picked. You can just absorb that pretty easily. Keep in mind, this is a 2-minute cooldown. And so 2-minute cooldown means that you have to be very disciplined on when you use this. Using this just to be able to die 5 seconds later, not worth it. It's not like an ult that you can throw out there all. It's like, I don't need this, right? So you have to be very, very cautious with how you use this. You can use this to engage and absorb a bunch of damage to save your team from damage. You can dive towers and really create havoc and absorb damage and save your team while also being more of that disruptor. I can use this defensively. I can use this offensively. You really have to think outside of the box on how you use Ardent Defender to make yourself more valuable in a fight. And it could just be a matter of absorbing stuff in the middle of a fight so that you can get another couple rotations of abilities off, making it very difficult for a lot of people. You heal for 50% of the damage received. So you have to be very careful when you use this and how you use this. And this is really going to test your skill because it's a 2-minute cooldown. If this was 80 seconds, boom, rock this every fight. It's a 2-minute cooldown. So you better be prepared on using this and not having it for the next fight. Sacred Ground, would really recommend this to newer players. And honestly, even more experienced players don't really use this either. This has to be a very point-controlled area of fighting, whether it's Volskaya, whether it's a map where you're going to hold a point for a long time. Having 50 armor just sitting there is really cool. It's on a 40-second cooldown, but 40 physical armor is normally enough. Self-healing is normally enough. Something of those lines. I'm not normally in a situation where I'm going to go. The level 20 upgrade on this is actually pretty cool, but overall, there's going to be more utility than I'm going to find in the other talents. As far as level 13 goes, going back to what I had mentioned before, Velen's Chosen means that you can now start to do damage. Like Yrel already does a decent amount of damage, but Velen's Chosen, if I had gone E-build or trying to do different things, getting 10% spell power. If I had gone level 7 knockback, I might run in with my W fully charged, and then I can just DE on top of them. Boom, now I've got extra spell power and I'm Goomba stomping them. Then I can charge up my Q and go. Like, there's a whole lot of things that I can do with Velen's Chosen. Getting that extra spell power means I'm doing a lot of damage. As far as everything else goes, Repentance, increasing Avenging slows Wrath by 25% and the duration by 0.75 seconds. This isn't terrible. Again, normally what you're doing is you're jumping onto them and then knocking them back into your team. This can help. Normally you're getting the stun off of that, so this doesn't tend to show up as often. This here, enemy heroes hit by Vindication at maximum charge deal 40% less damage for 3 seconds. Keep in mind that if I'm playing against the Deathwing, there's a lot of things I can do where I can just jump on top of him. He's got a giant hitbox. He's not going anywhere. And I can just jump on top of him a ton. Coincidentally, I could also just reduce his damage because he's not going to do a lot to me, and depending on whether I'm going to get there. Going back to the earlier thought at level 1, using my Q or fully charging my Q doesn't happen that often. As much as I would like to, that's normally the one that comes last, and normally at that point, you've already eaten, you've already W'd, you've already done a bunch of stuff, and then your Q comes next. At that point, they're probably tired of you being there. You might be taking damage, you might be doing stuff. So I don't normally recommend this if I'm going against like a full dive composition that's like Kerrigan Alarak where it's a lot of spell damage. Maybe I would do this. This isn't bad. Reducing damage by 40%. How can you ever go wrong with that? But because of all the other liabilities that you have, Velen's Chosen, another super generic because it's affected by all of your abilities. This talent works out really good as a result. The other ones can come in if and when needed to try and figure out, does it complement your team? Can it counter the other team? As far as level 16 goes, this is pretty much up in the air as well. If you're E'ing and W'ing in and you DW, Righteous Hammer reduces the armor of enemy heroes hit by 20 for 4 seconds, and it does bonus damage equal to 70% or 7% of their maximum health, which means I can use this on a tank. 7% health reduction, boom, there you go. And 20 armor reduction. You're getting knocked back into my team and you're probably gonna die, right? So this right here is fantastic, which is why sometimes just going a raw W at 7 and running in with your 16 can be really good. This sets up your team. You're already setting up your team by getting in there. You're creating disruption. You're trying to create kill targets. You're trying to get into position. You're trying to do a lot of those things. And I think this works out very well for those reasons. You can now jump on a tank. Diablo just jumped in and shadow charged your team. You're on top of them. You hit them. You get them away from the prime target. You hit them with your W. You might not even E first. You might just instantly W to save your teammates. That's why I said that, like, there's so much that goes into it. It might be intimidating for some, but I would recommend going in, playing some Yrel games and learning it for yourself, is that there's going to be a time where you're in a fight and you're like, ooh, I should have saved my D for this ability. Same thing goes for Kael'thas. If you've ever played Kael'thas, you can super generically DW twice, E, whatever, but sometimes you need to DE, sometimes you need to DQ, very rarely, but it does happen. Same thing for Yrel, is that you might do things out of order and you're going to learn along the way, and that's why it can be difficult. For other talents, casting a basic ability reduces the cooldown of Divine Purpose by 2 seconds. This can be very good when you consider this is only on 8 seconds, so there's a 6-second downtime, which makes this very strong. You can charge up your abilities. You can do a lot of things in a fight. Holy Wrath, this is an AoE auto attack to where it's going to splash near people. This is pretty situational. But for what it's worth, Templar's Verdict is really strong for all the reasons we mentioned before. All of Yrel's abilities are on very short cooldowns. They're all 6 seconds. It's just that they can be interrupted. Imagine going in and getting that and then hitting them again 6 seconds later. Like, it's pretty insane, the things that you can do on Yrel. So play around those things with the talents. I think Divine Favor can be good. Templar's Verdict can be good. Holy Wrath probably on the lower end. Good for late game wave clear, but if you need wave clear at this point, you're in trouble. Level 20. I'm not a big fan of any of the heroic upgrades, except for maybe Hallowed Ground. Now, here's something that if you've watched any of my videos, if you have a self-cleanse, there's almost never a time where you shouldn't pick it. Ever. So if I'm going in as Yrel and I got all this stuff that I want to do and they've been interrupting me left and right, I now have a self-cleanse on 10 seconds. So I can jump in, self-cleanse, and get that big old hammer because they've been maybe stunning me. They've been silencing me. I pre-cleanse myself, and then I just wreak havoc, and they can't do anything about it. These are things that you have to learn. And if you're not willing to learn, don't play the hero. If they have a self-cleanse, you should probably be picking it. If you have a cleanse and you're playing healer, you should probably be picking it. If you're a healer and you have cleanse and you don't pick cleanse, don't play healer. If you're a Yrel and you don't pick cleanse, we'll give you something of a pass, but you should learn to play this. Very rarely, if ever, should you take yourself out of a team fight. Why would you take yourself out of a team fight? There's never a time when, like, you're the one that should be dying so that your range damage dealers can hopefully get the kill and secure the kill. There's never a time when you should go Bubble Hearth. Never, ever, ever pick this. Even if it's that 1 in 1,000 chance, maybe. But don't. Like, let's say it's like, oh, we're diving core, but they're backdooring. Maybe you need to Bubble Hearth. Maybe that's the only time. You just hit 20. You're there. Don't do it. Hallowed Ground can be pretty cool. Casting Avenging Wrath while Sacred Ground, it moves Sacred Ground. While you're inside, it moves it. So it moves with you. So the 50 armor comes with you. Anytime you get knocked out or jump out, it can be a little weird. So, well, not jump out. You can't jump out. So if you get knocked out or walk out. Word of Glory, 2-minute cooldown. Committing a level 20 to a 2-minute cooldown can be very awkward. I don't know if anybody's ever picked this. But Seraphim allows you to, look, if somebody's in trouble, I can go unstoppable and I can help them. Look, there's no doubt about it. Seraphim is just incredible. You should learn to use this. 8-second downtime on a self-cleanse is phenomenal. You should always be looking to use this at any given moment. So for that's Yrel. If you want to go a super generic build, Dauntless, Hand of Freedom, into Holy Avenger, Ardent Defender, Belen's Chosen, Templar's Verdict, or literally any of these, and Seraphim. That would be the starter build, but you've got to use critical thinking with Yrel in terms of when you use your abilities, what the enemy team is bringing to the table, and what you can do to counter that. Speccing into Q build can be pretty difficult as Yrel because normally you're trying to get disruption and stuns from your W. That's where a lot of the power comes from. So try and work around your strengths as Yrel, engaging with your E, creating disruption with your divine purpose into your hammer. So with your righteous hammer, you just instantly try and hammer them. You can get armor reduction. You can get knockback. You can get stuns. You can position yourself differently. You can save teammates. You can do all kinds of things with Yrel. She has a lot of damage. She has decent wave clear. She utilizes her abilities to save her teammates. She creates disruption versus the enemy team. She's super tanky. Her health bar might be the highest for a bruiser, actually. She's basically a tank in bruiser form that does damage. It's actually insane how good this hero is. You just have to be careful on what you play it into, how you play it, and what talent you're going to go, because that can determine your play style. Overall, there's basically no bad maps for Yrel. There's none. I mean, there's probably some. Open maps can be a little weird, like Hanamura, because she doesn't really do camps that well, but she does wave clear, AoE wave clear. But overall, Yrel, one of the most overachieving, underrated heroes that you'll probably ever see. If you ever see a high level Yrel, you're gonna be like, that's really good. But Yrel as a whole, fantastic all the way around, and it's really hard to go wrong. If you're a bruiser main, if you're playing around that, I would implore you to try Yrel and learn Yrel and dominate games. That's just Yrel in a nutshell.
I wonder if he remembered to turn notifications off him.
Holy sh! Well, you see, the thing is that I just finished. And I didn't turn notifications off. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.